Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm to the fall Ruth and Norman Moore Visiting Professor Lecture. I'm Montserrat Bonveí Rosich, and I want to start by acknowledging that the San Fox School of Design and Visual Arts is located on the traditional and ancestral land of the Osage Nation, the original inhabitants of what is now known as St. Louis. We pay respect to the people of those tribes, past, present, and future, and we honor the land itself, which remains sacred to the Osage people. In offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm and support tribal sovereignty, history, and experience by endless generations through their continued connection to this land, the land where we reside, occupy, and call home. Before I pass the microphone to Robert MacArthur, that is the Ruth and Norman Moore Professor of Architecture, who will introduce our guest tonight, I want to just highlight a few upcoming events for the school. So I will start with the meetup session that we will have with our guest on Wednesday. All students are welcome from noon till 1 p.m., where we will discuss in a Q&A the work that Jose is presenting tonight. I also want to highlight that this Thursday until Saturday, we have the Sweet Perspective, an interdisciplinary symposium exploring connections between optics, geometry, and representation beyond linear perspective, co-chaired by Jonathan Stillman and Nathan Jones. Finally, our next public lecture in architecture will be the Amen lecture with the architect and urbanist Rafi Siegel. Thanks. With no more delay, I will ask Robert to come.
Good evening. Gives me great pleasure to introduce Jose Ahedo tonight. I am Robert MacArthur, the Ruth and Norman Moore Professor of Architecture, and I appreciate the recent tradition, Monica's idea, that I would be asked to introduce the Ruth and Norman Moore Visiting Professor, because it gives me a chance to highlight the fact that this family, the Ruth and Norman Moores, have donated not one, but two endowed professorships to this university. The first one is the permanent position that I hold, and the second is the one which is very unusual to dedicate that kind of position to a visiting professor, which has allowed us to bring people in every year from around the world. And so even though Ruth and Norman Moore are no longer with us, their family is, and I want to acknowledge the fact that this chair allows us to bring in someone like Jose Ahedo, but also to sponsor a lecture and have this person be a part of the school. So I'm going to acknowledge. Jose Ahedo was born in Vizcaya, Spain in 1980. He's such a young guy. He received his architecture degree in 2005 from the International University of Catalonia and earned a post-professional Master of Architecture degree from Harvard University's Graduate School of Design, I think 2014, 10, okay, 10. Jose Ahedo is an architect and the founder of StudioAhedo, an interdisciplinary architecture and design firm that was established in 2010 and located in Navarra, Spain. The studio works across various fields, including research facilities, residential architecture, graphic design, branding, and software development. One of Jose's most notable works is Blanca, his first completed project, a comprehensive dairy complex situated in the Pyrenees. This project includes 13 distinct buildings, such as animal facilities, research laboratories, and an educational center, showcasing his ability to integrate complex functionality with innovative design in a challenging landscape. Jose Ahedo's work and writings have been featured in design publications, including the Harvard Design Magazine, Arquitectura Viva, and Log. His collaborative project, the NKO House with Lagula Architectis, was recognized with a nomination for the prominent European Union Mies Award in 2015. In 2014, Jose Ahedo was awarded the prestigious Wheelwright Prize by the Harvard Graduate School of Design. If you don't know about this, you should look into it. For his project, Domesticated Grounds, Design and Domesticity Within Animal Farming Systems. This groundbreaking research involved an extensive journey through remote areas across 8 countries on 4 continents. The project explored the interplay between design and domesticity in animal farming communities, covering over 13,000 miles, the original research, of challenging terrains. The investigation sought to address critical issues related to cultural and architectural heritage, infrastructural and territorial policies, landscape design, technological advancements, and gender and social dynamics within animal production. Through in-depth visits and interviews with approximately 200 families, university technicians, scientists, local governments, and policymakers, the project aimed to shed light on the complexities facing farming communities and to uncover opportunities for designers to positively impact this economically disparate sector. So Jose has been continuing this research that he began in 2014 with the wheelwright, and has now extended that to an even wider range of places around the world. And a number of you in the room know this because you were able, like I was, to see his presentation for the studio, which has a flabbergasting 13 project sites all around the world, all agriculture communities. The most beautiful presentation for a studio lottery I have ever seen. I wanted to immediately take the studio myself, and so it's my understanding that not all the studio sites were in the original research, but this has all been sort of folded together in a very beautiful way. Each presentation starting with a kind of aerial view, which is almost surreal in its abstraction, and then suddenly you find yourself sort of standing in this landscape. And it's, I think, a real privilege for us that he is bringing this research, which I think is truly innovative in the sense of addressing an area that architects and generally sort of design professionals in general sort of have overlooked. And in fact, seeking out some, what seemed to be in the presentation, some very remote places, and yet they have incredibly sort of clear character and a real sense of presence. They're completely undiluted by this sort of global business that we're in. They prove that the local is still very powerful. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Jose Ahedo.
Thank you, Robert. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you so much to the school, to San Fox School, and to the Department of Architecture for inviting me this semester. I hope that my visit here is very productive and useful. I'm not sure if we can dim the light. There's a lot of slides with very dark photography. Yeah, a little more maybe. That's great, thank you. So here's an index of the lecture. Since we are in San Luis and I'm a big fan of Jonathan Franzen's work, I thought I would tweak his book title into How Not to Be Alone, because I'm going to also talk a lot about collaboration. Here's the index of the studio. Many of you don't really know me, so I'm going to talk about me and the studio for 10 minutes, then rural research I conducted the last 10 years, and then some rural work. This is me when I was 12. I was raised in a dairy farm in northern Spain. I think this photo will become relevant as we proceed. I was raised in the north of Spain, very near in the Basque Country, in Navarra, and in the city, a very small city called Tudela, which is also hometown for Rafael Moneo, which you will probably know. And I have like the smallest studio you can imagine. I rented an empty warehouse and did a renovation with this kind of like super orange stair. It's the smallest because it's just me. I'm CEO and intern at the same time. So I take care of all the scales and duties and tasks of the studio. I only have one piece of furniture, which is this 20-feet desk. And everything I own, it's on this desk. This is my desk, and everyone who comes to the studio works in this same desk. It's a cross, 20 feet by 20 feet, pretty oversized. As Robert said, my work is very diverse. I'm not just doing architecture. I also do graphic design. I have worked for packaging for wineries in the area, hardware, user interface, I've been commissioned photography works and whatnot. And that scales in sizes and mediums makes me not be alone because I have to work with a lot of different agents like farmers, scientists, suppliers, architects, of course, programmers, and engineers. I'm going to show you a couple of projects just so that you get a sense of that scale or that range of mediums. This is my hometown. This is a collaboration with Lagul Architects, which are like my best friends. They allowed me to have my studio inside the studio in Barcelona for a bunch of years, and then I moved back to my hometown. So when I was commissioned this, I offered them, and we did it together. It's a medieval neighborhood. It's an 8th century neighborhood. There's a 11th century cathedral like 60 meters away from the house, and then the other side is the 12th century church. That's the cathedral in the middle, and in the bottom left corner is the small house that we built. Now, this being a medieval neighborhood, it has like a special urban plan for it, and pretty much everything is regulated, height, materials, color of the facade, like the size of the windows, it's regulated by that plan. And you know what happens when you ask architects to follow some rules, but they say like, I'm an architect, I'm special, so I don't follow rules. But we certainly follow all the rules. It's in a very, very narrow street. It's 7 feet in the narrowest place. This is the church near the side. And we follow all the rules to the T. We did what the plan supposed us to do, and we got a pretty standard building for the neighborhood. And we also incorporated even features that are not required by this plan, but we thought they match with the neighborhood, like the window framing, and we scattered like a lot of chimneys like to get to that kind of resolution of the neighborhood. So this would be like a standard house if you follow that plan, like pretty common facades. But here's the trick. The south facade, all those 7 windows in the right are hollowed. They have the railings, which are ornamental, but there's no window there. You can see here in the plan. So we could, with this gesture, we could make another facade and made a much more complicated, especially house with that recessed facade that you see that makes that patio. The ground floor is like, maybe I could share this. It's like in the Basque Country, there's common practice to meet with your friends from your kindergarten friends every week and cook together and have dinner. So there are these places that are called chocos, and people from like many year friends, like from kindergarten, meet every week, and maybe one is a lawyer and the other has become a plumber, but there's no social status in these spaces. So that's this ground floor space. Then in the first floor, there's a small office and a small apartment. There's this stair that you can see it and project like sports and watch TV. And then in the top floor, there's like the main area, kitchen, master bedroom, and small like living. If you see it in section, the south facade is like the one is hollow. It has a maple tree that runs throughout that patio. And this tree, what it makes is that it's deciduous, so in the winter, it lets the sun goes into the second facade, and in the summer it blocks and makes shade for the house. This is the finished product. You can see there the street with the finished building and pretty much a standard facade. Those 7 windows on the right image are the ones that are hollowed. These 7 ones here by night with the maple tree. And this is the recessed facade that is much more complex in geometry and spatially. The building doesn't look like it's made out of steel, but in order to do this kind of like complex facade, we had to do it out of steel and super thin concrete slabs. And this is the facade that is mimicking the neighborhood. That's the other side, like patio and the kind of oversized stair and the elevator. That window door is the elevator, and this is the main area. Kitchen, and that's the entrance to the Choco, this big door with no frame. And that's the dining and living area for this client. Another extremely different project is called, I've been involved working for a company that's called Algomilk, which it's a software company. I was in charge of the naming, the research for the brand identity and web design. I did the infographics for them, and I wanted to show you the hardware design that we did like 2 years ago. Let me talk to you, explain what this company does. Basically, it's a dairy farming company, and it gets external data, like from many inputs, from milk production, milk fat production, milk protein. It goes online on real time and measures, sees the cost of feed of every nutrient that they're going to give to a cow. It measures the weather in a week in advance, and the algorithm returns you like a recipe or a diet or a ration for each cow of the farm. So basically, if you have 10,000 cows, you have 10,000 recipes. It also suggests you how to group them in order to maximize productivity, and you can go online and check what other farms are doing into a federated model. It's a federated deep learning model, and optimize itself. So once there's this suggestion, the producer can choose to be like either maximum economic profit, you can go for maximum milk yield, or you could go for minimal environmental impact. So that's the producer's choice. The algorithm just makes those suggestions. So they needed a hardware that goes into the farm tracks, which is basically a box with a touch screen, and the operator can follow the instructions of the algorithm, so it can mix the nutrients for each pen and for each group of cows. This was kind of making a building in a sense, because you have to make sure that there's a structural integrity in this cell. It's very bumpy and it has to be very rugged. You have a program to accomplish, which is like you have a lot of electronic components. There has to be like internal relations of that program, and it has to connect to the outside, so it's like connecting a building to a neighborhood. It has to have proper ventilation, has to be waterproof, dustproof, and it has to connect to the outside. These were the tests. We were working 3D model working. You can see there like all the structural reinforcements of this kind of very thin cell, ventilation test, how all the program accommodated into a very small box. And these were 1 to 5. They were, of course, failing all the time. This was number 5, not enough ventilation. The structural support there was not enough because the farm truck gives this thing a lot of torque force, so it was breaking. Has to accommodate all the switches. This was almost there. That's the joint to the farm truck and the touchscreen. And of course, like in a building, when you do you have to adjust for screws, you have to adjust the structure to the screw that's in the middle that you can see there. And I like to show this because otherwise, people think that projects are magic and they only see the final product. This is the photography product session for the thing. And this is the final product then it went to an injection molding process to make it mass produce it and make it cheaper. I was also in charge of the user interface design so that the operator doesn't have to think much and just go for work. It's very clean, super simple type, very crispy somehow. And I was also in charge of the user interface of the mobile application because you can also run it from a mobile phone. Here on the bottom of the app, you can see that you can optimize for milk or money or environmental. I wanted to show this project because now it can it's a good segue to the rural research I've been conducting the last 10 years. As Robert said, I was very lucky and was granted the Whittle Prize in 2014, and I was researching farming communities worldwide. This is something also that ties it to the title of the conference, because you cannot do this alone, for sure. You cannot go to these places alone, because it's really hard to get there and to have access to these communities. So all these institutions really helped me, and I always saw this when I saw this research. These were the trips I did. They were from very poor countries to extremely rich agricultural sites. And I'm going to show you a video about that kind of complexity to get to the site, so that you get a feeling of how this thing was. It's just 1 minute. It was a teaser for an exhibition, and it's really low resolution because iPhones 10 years ago were not that good. So the first thing I want to address when thinking about the countryside and rural areas is that we are very much influenced by pastoral and pastoral music and literature from the 17th century. We tend to think about it as a very quiet, comfortable life in communing with nature. And as you will see, it's not comfortable or quiet or peaceful at all. Let's talk, this is the most simple way of farming, which is pastoral systems. You move livestock through a territory, and livestock grazes there. I did, I think, almost 6,000 miles in Mongolia, from the desert in the south, which can get 120 Fahrenheit, to the north that in the winter might get minus 40 Fahrenheit. So the climate changed a lot, animals changed a lot, and humans and architecture are the ones that stay as a constant. This is how it looks like, the landscape of the south. These communities, they are like single family households grazing through Mongolia. This is a pretty standard household in the desert of Gobi. They can build this and dismantle it in 45 minutes, which is pretty impressive. And it works in a very, it's very performative. The main economic activities are herding, either camels, yaks, goats, sheep, horses, and some cows. This is how they look like. The guy in the middle is wearing a New York Knicks cap, which I don't know where he got it. And also hunting. They do some hunting. This is an AK-47 bayonet, which, if we look back to the picture of Lorraine, the painting, you'll start to feel like it's not that peaceful. They just had a marmot, so I had to pixelate it. This is a typical photo of the south. also like as I was interviewing and visiting these families, I was shooting all these portraits. I was carrying with me a beauty disc, which is basically a fashion industry light, which is really stupid to go with that, but you can shoot outside and you can get a very high-speed flash to turn the background black. This is a woman milking yaks in the north, which is, as you can see, it changes quite a lot in terms of landscape and climate. And the domestic space is really it's very linked to nature, of course. There's a strong connection in between the household and nature, normal activities scenes. Shearing sheep is one of the main economies also. And I wanted to show this because all these territories and landscapes, they seem like they are pretty stable. They seem pretty simple to research, but the fact is that they are affected by external forces and they are really fragile and they can disappear like because of something that happened thousands of miles away. Let me give you an example of this. Fashion industry has gone hard on cashmere and the prices have gone up. So Mongolian herders used to herd a lot of sheep, but not many goats. When they made a change from sheep to goats, it seems like a small change. They can get more money, and they are like ruminants, so that wouldn't make any difference. But the fact is that sheep, when they step, they are very gentle with the terrain. They have a very slow steps, and goats, they smash the terrain like jumping into it. So running thousands and thousands of goats through a territory is like going with steamrollers, and there's no grass anymore when they change the production to goats. So it looks like a small, but it can be devastating. These are a couple of girls milking goats, of course by hand. Another threat to these kind of livelihoods, I'm not even sure today how I got access to the biggest open-air coal mine in the world, which is in the south of Mongolia. It's run by Chinese companies, and this is how it looks like, which is like a massive operation. And this also, all this coal is going back to China. Or it's going not back, it's going from Mongolia to China. So these kind of like gigantic trucks are destroying all the grazing area from this part of Mongolia to China. These have made like a lot of these herders to migrate to cities. I forgot to tell that Mongolia is like 3 times the size of Texas, roughly, and it has 3 million people. And 1.5 million people live in the city. So, and there's like 70 million heads of livestock in the territory. So it's a very low density, but they cannot support their families, so they start to move to the cities. These are like what the slums or suburbs of those cities look like when the herders arrive. They just move their tent and they build a fence, and that's pretty much it. Then the government runs infrastructure, electricity, but it's kind of really modest. This is a photo of one of those neighborhoods with the palisades and so as you can see, like it made look like, again, the Lorraine painting. These herders, these communities are affected by something that is going on thousands and thousands of miles away. So we could start talking about some sort of delocalized rurality or transnational farms. This is one of the biggest dairy farms in the world. It's called Alumni. It's in Saudi Arabia. They milk 105,000 cows per day. So the amount of feed and water and gas to run this operation makes that they cannot support it with with the Saudi Arabian landscape, so they have to start buying farmland in other parts of the world. That's why I'm saying like transnational farms, because these owners are going to Argentina and they are bypassing law because they cannot do that, but they are buying like big chunks of Argentina. They are buying big chunks of California. So there's a lot of concern about water rights in California, about these operations coming and just getting all the alfalfa and taking it back to Saudi Arabia, Sudan, everywhere. There's like this relation that how do you dominate the landscape? Mongolian herders are like individual families facing the landscape, but there's another way which would be like a collective effort towards taking control of that landscape. I went to Azores Islands in the 2015 to the island of São Miguel, which is in the eastern group part of the Azores Islands. This is right in the middle of the Atlantic. So you can imagine like this island used to produce just oranges, and sailors would stop here. They would get oranges so that they didn't get scurvy, and they would come to America. But there was this pest, and all the orange trees were gone, and they shifted the whole production of the island to dairy farming. Now, farming in a volcanic island is not the easiest things to do. It's extremely fragmented. The real estate pressure of this island is probably one of the highest in Europe. So what happens is that all these farmers, they have small pieces of land scattered through all the island, and they go through a rotational grazing system, so they are all the time moving the animals from side to side to graze. It's a very sustainable way to do it, but in order to do that, you cannot have a building that it's a farm. So you need this device, which is like super small milking machine. This is it open. So you go there, you've milked maybe 10 cows, and maybe they have 100 and they have 10 sites. This is a bigger version of that milking machine closed. There's a lot of thefts going on here, like water, because you have to take it to the mountains, so there's a lot of gas stolen. This is the thing open, and this is how it looks. It's in between like a machine architecture and whatnot. Then they take the milk and they take it to a cooperative, and I'll explain you why they only can run through cooperatives. The fact is that there's no big company that can go to Azores and buy a big enough piece of land to put a proper farm, because it's just extremely expensive. So these cooperatives, it's a joint venture between many, many farmers. You took your milk there, and they are responsible for selling it in Portugal, in mainland. And the thing is that if you don't, they have to do it this way, because if you want to run one of those machines, if you want gas for those machines, you need to buy a whole tanker because you are in the middle of the Atlantic. So they have to buy feed and gas and electricity by in a really, really big scale. This is also another collective effort towards landscape. I went to see aquaculture communities in China, in Fujian and Hainan, which is the island south of Hong Kong, near Macau. There are two ways to perform an aquaculture operation. It's either pond, where you modify the landscape heavily to let it flood, and then you have the fish or seafood there. This is kind of like how it looks like in a satellite view. This is more technocratic driven. It's mostly companies that can afford to make this kind of huge movements of land and water. And there's another way that it's make this kind of floating city, which is hundreds of families that have built this kind of mega structure that floats, and there you have the little ponds. They mostly farm fish like tilapia and yellow cracker and seafood. This is the floating typology. Be aware, this look innocent again, you could think it's an innocent photo, but if you look in the top right, there's 2 security cameras staring at this woman, because this is a heavily I was meeting with this community. They are called Tanka. It's my understanding that Tanka is not the proper term, Chinese term now, so there are some suggestions about calling them boat dwellers. They basically live in water. This is how that, it's a city, that part of the city works like. It's a typhoon area, so if they were not tied together, they would be blown away the first year. This is like how it looks. Inside these structures, there's like urban lights, which are the red small spheres. There are restaurants, there's a post office, there's anything you can imagine inside. Okay, so what's the threat for this community? The threat is that Hainan is a very aggressive local tourism for China, and they are starting to build this kind of like super high skyscrapers, and it's getting a lot of real estate pressure also. This is a recently built hotel in like 100 feet away from that. We talk now about typology as a material system. Most of these systems wouldn't work if it was not for that kind of machines or some sort of material systems. And there's a lot to learn from all of these in terms of construction and typologies. These are the propaganda posters of Canada West, which ran through, like the States, through a colonial process into the West. They were calling it the homeland, free farms for the million. They were promising like a better life. But the thing is that they couldn't get through the Great Plains because if you try, this is in the States, when they got to the Great Plains, they didn't have the wood or the stone to build fences. So livestock would stray. So it was not until this patent and another one that we're litigating came into place that it's barbed wire, that they could build like super cheap fences and they could like confine all that livestock and move west. It was also a way not to get livestock into the train lines. More material system, these two women are weaving like some baskets to carry food, same system to make the cover of a boat. These are, I will talk about New Zealand a little later, these are hedges that are windbreaks that prevent soil erosion from lattices from Mongolian herders, domes. These things are always oriented to the south, and it's funny because when you get inside, you get like a feeling that you're under the sun. They are always painting it orange. Airflow, that small gesture there produces a stack effect, so you can get 3 or 4 degrees cooler the tent. These communities, they don't waste anything. Like it's really sustainable in the sense of that everything is useful. These ropes here are made with horsehair. The waterproof membrane and insulation is made out of sheep felt and very small pieces of wood. So this is like the extreme, how you say that? Like radical efficiency. They even like dry cow manure and they cook with it as if it was like a fuel. These are more modern approaches. I went to Paraguay in 2016. This is like east side of the Paraná River. These two neighborhoods come from the agrarian reform of the Paraguayan government in the Department of San Pedro, and they are called Nuclear 1 and 3. So they were trying to give some pieces of land to indigenous people so that they could farm. This is how it looks in the middle. It's always like a small church, a small school, and a soccer field, and all these kind of houses around it. The main driving economy is cattle and for beef. And they have this typology that I found pretty interesting, that it's called Culata Yuvai. It's like an indigenous typology where you build you build this first, and then as the family grows and there's more needs, you keep building those modules. There are many ranges of economies here, and in the middle there's a middle space that it lets cross ventilation to go through. So you have the middle space is often, this is another middle space, but this is done with thatch, the roof. Both sides, they have mostly bedrooms. And then in the center of the building, there's the kitchen and living area, and sometimes livestock and whatnot. This is one of those centers, that's a washing machine. And taking advantage that I'm in Paraguay, I would like to just mention this because I think it's important. While in Paraguay, I was meeting a lot of committees. These people are getting some help and benefits from the government. So I was traveling with the Ministry of Agriculture technicians to make sure that they existed first, and then that they could handle the help the money they were gonna get. As you can see, these committees are made basically by women because they realized that if they gave the money to the men, it would just disappear and they would drink the whole thing. So it's fully run by women and they take charge of the economy of the house. And that leads me to some of these territories have the highest gender inequality index in the world. This index is run by fertility health. It's empowerment and access to labor. And everywhere I went, I could see women doing not only house chores, but taking care of the animals and the whole operation that get the money. Same thing in India, in Rajasthan. And these are some of the portraits I took of these women in Mongolia, Paraguay, Bolivia. This is in India. He was a dairy farmer. Some of them didn't want me to take the pictures. And also, when you travel a lot and you travel to not very open areas, you find kind of difficult situations. I've been shooting in a couple of places where women were not allowed to sit during daylight. So they had to stand up from sunrise to sunset, which is 14 hours. As far as we are in a design school, I guess there's some design opportunities to change this reality. So that's why I'm telling you this story. All these operations also have they used to have, there was a tradition of cultural output. There were architecture, objects, design associated to these productive activities. That's not the case anymore. Here's a building that was devoted to livestock. Not the case anymore. This is a horse cemetery in Mongolia. This is to celebrate the greatest horses, racing horses that have lived in Mongolia. And people go there and just put this kind of blue scarf in respect for those horses. Music festivals in Mongolia. I went to the biggest camel fair in the world, which they trade 30,000 camels in 5 days. So you can imagine getting 30,000 heads of animals into a site, sell and buy, and then they are gone in 3 days. And the thing is that when you go to these things, there's this cultural and social approach. So it's a festival, it's a religious party, and also they are doing business. Looks like this. It was pretty big site, and you can see it's a festive environment because of the fair wheels and all the food involved. If we take a look at how this cultural output disappeared, if you look at the Industrial Revolution, there was a time where people start moving to cities, so architects start moving to solve problems of the cities. So the rural countryside was neglected, and there were no architects or designers or humanists working in these areas. So that meant that food production, it was either vernacular, that the ones we have seen, or extremely technocratic, like the one in Saudi Arabia. But there were like a tradition of projects, like big rural projects in the 18th century, like this from Ledoux, the city of salt, that had extremely complex programmatic coexistence between housing, production, health, education, and leisure. I went to Bolivia for a bunch of reasons. This is a map of Bolivia that's mapping human in blue and alpaca population in magenta, and then the yellowish is like cows. And when I went to Bolivia, I went north of Santa Cruz and was visiting the Jesuit reduction, which is like pretty much from the same time. And they had like urban plans. They had like program for housing. There was like this church, of course, and there was a main square, and all was linked to a production. So I was shooting those productions. This is like in San Javier. These churches, if you have time, and now they are UNESCO buildings. They're really, really beautiful. But there was like a plan between these kind of, either you agree or not with the plan, there's like a plan. This is how it looks in the inside, which was like, they were German Jesuits, and there, it was all like sculptured wood, very beautiful. And this was part of the housing, which was like this veranda. This housing worked pretty well. It was climatically correct, and it was like much more like appropriate. I also went to Bolivia to see some of those communities that started in the 18th century, which are Mennonites. They came to States, and then they made their way through until Argentina. They have been like migrating from side to side. Very humble houses, but there's like, when you see like these kind of like curtains and the rugs, there's like a lot of self-respect and dignity doing that, because your sink is a bucket right there, and you have no shower. I was shooting Mennonites in Bolivia, story for another day. These are Mennonite communities in the other side of Paraguay, in the Paraná, in El Chaco. El Chaco was a place that pretty much no one wanted to go, because if you dig a pit, you got salt water, so they offered the Mennonites to go there, and they have thrived like really hard. And as you can see from the names of the cities, it traces back to that kind of like tradition, like from Philadelphia, Neuland, and Friedrichsfeld. This is like how they have evolved in time. So this is like 10 years after, 20 years after. That white thing is like the size of Manhattan. I also went to New Zealand and to the South Island, Carltonbury Plains. I convinced all this sheep to look at the camera at the same time, except this one. And the Canterbury Plains are like, they are pretty exposed to climatic conditions. They are very near Antarctica, so they have planted all these kind of like windbreaks that are done with Monterey pine. They're really big. These pines were imported from California. And this is a typical household in New Zealand. Most of it is sheep and dairy farming, some alpacas also. This is how it looks from the air, from a hot air balloon. And what I want you to think about when I show you this is that this is a typical household also, with those windbreaks to protect themselves. But the thing is that there were no mammals in New Zealand until the 13th century. So there were only a few species of bats. So pretty much everything you see here, from insects to plants to humans, has been imported into a newly man-created landscape, which is pretty much artificial or 99% synthetic. This, like, there were none of the species you can see in this photo existed in New Zealand. This is also in Bolivia. I was visiting those communities right there. This is how the soy deforestation of Bolivia, like the Brazilian capital going in Bolivia, looks like. And these were the communities I was like, this is like also like agrarian reform, but from the Bolivian government. It's like these kind of like super like long roads. So the point here is that all these processes, believe it or not, are terraforming the planet, and some ontologies that we thought that were very clear of human, animal, natural, artificial, or rural and urban are not that clear anymore. As far as I see it, like to end this part of the lecture, we all share here a double duty. One is like as consumers, you have the privilege to vote in November, but you get to vote 3 times a day for how you want these landscapes and these communities to perform. So vote with a fork. And the other one is that your artists, designers, architects, use your skills to change that reality. And now finally, I'm going to explain like a farming project I did in the Pyrenees. It's like a dairy hub, which is like, they do research, enzyme research, it has an embryo lab, farm, and it has also a learning, an educational center that gathers people from all over the world to make symposiums there. It has this old village here, and this is like the farm. These are the cow pens. They are also following like some regulations of territorial regulations of this area, which is like the roof has to be either black or red because of they are traditionally built with slates. So the pens are pretty simple structure. They have these pivot lines, and then they have this is covering it, but they have this so that you can also produce a stack effect to ventilate the pens. This is how they look like. I was also in charge of all the layout and landscape. This is how they look from the inside. It's all made out of corrugated seed, and sometimes it's perforated and other times it's not. This is a cow room because they also sell like embryos and they do breeding activities. Milking parlor. All these drawings were not done for the project. So all these drawings are the background of the user interface that it's a automatic system to run the farm. So we did afterwards to run the electrical, water, and everything. This is the entrance to the milking parlor. This is like a carousel, and in section, it looks like this. You have the carousel and then all the operating machines downstairs, which is like pretty much like a submarine. And again, you cannot do this alone. You have to adjust the architecture to many different agents and disciplines in order to fit this in the building. Here in this area is a building that I hope that it gets built pretty soon. It's ready for construction, which is this one. It's a cooking, it's like an exhibit place, and you can do cooking exhibitions here. Looks like this. It's the form is following just the side, and it has like a patio in the middle. And it can adjust for many different like venues, like small exhibition, cooking exhibition, workshops, and a big dinner party. So the thing is that the whole thing is modulated with that triangle. The floor is planned to be green terrazzo and white terrazzo, and the whole building is modulated to that kind of like triangular grid, and the structure is running like the other way, or like in the other direction. It is also full of mechanical facilities so that you can plug and unplug a kitchen like almost everywhere in the building. This is the section. It works like all the infrastructure goes from here into this kind of ring, and then it puts it in an upper ring that distributes all these facilities. And this also makes that the foundation has to be in 3 levels, so it's kind of like you also have to adjust the thickness of each column, because otherwise you will be overdrawing like some of the columns into thicknesses that would be like not appropriate. This is how the pillar gets to the ground with a cross. I think it's a very nice detail. And it was drawn like facade development. In order to do this, like once you have the facades, you can project the primary structure, secondary structure, and you can have like a drawing to build this thing off-site for every facade. This is the ring I was telling you about that runs. And there's like the connection of the primary structure with the facade is like, it doesn't get to the facade, the primary structure. So more details, I'm going to speed this up. This is how it would look like. Looks pretty solid from the outside, and it has these pivot doors like the pens, so you can open it in case you need. And this is the last project I want to show you. It's the educational center here in the farm. It was meant to be steel construction and very light, screwed panels, but we thought it would be nicer to reference the local farms that are pretty much made with cinder block, because it's really cheap. It's a very classical building as far as I can see it, because it has like this kind of X, that it's a plinth, and then you have the architecture, and they have columns with a capital, and then you have the roof. So it's pretty much like Greek. And it has, this is a classroom for 40 people, mostly scientists, reception with some restrooms, and there's an auditorium for 150 people that looks into the valley. It only has 8 columns, and it has all these kind of like prefab concrete pieces embedded in the plinth, so that you'll see how they work. We welded, well, I didn't weld it, but I planned it. We welded the whole thing in the ground and in 2 parts. And then we had 2 cranes, one in the middle of the building, one on the other side. And then we had like 4 more small forklifts. And then we had the capitals, which are these 2 things, with the proper angle, so that when the thing gets lifted up, it gets the slope that we wanted. So this was going like the first part going up, and you can see these 2 welders ready. There were 4, because there were 4 columns, so once it was at the proper angle, we could weld it. Then, yeah, this is like a detail. Once the first part was done, the crane would rotate, the other one would go to the other side of the building, lift the other part, and then we connected the center together. These are the 4 guys getting ready to fix the structure in place. This is like both parts up, with the middle remaining. And we first built the roof. This is by night, which is like, because it's perforated, it gets super light. During the day, it's really solid. By night, because it has lights behind the perforated seat, it gets pretty light. Then we did the plinth, which is this kind of like big concrete chunk. In order to do the plinth, we also taper the extremes of the plinth so that it gets like much more lighter. And before doing all of this, you have to run all the facilities. These are meant for trees. These are prefab pieces of concrete for urban design, and we use this kind of like prefab for doing concrete mats, these for the columns. And then after the plinth, we built the 2 classrooms, reception and auditorium. As you can see here, it's symmetrical in every direction, except that if we didn't need windows, like these were facing the valley, but this facade didn't need it, we would do this kind of Renaissance trick of doing blind windows, which is something Brunelleschi has done like forever. So it's symmetrical, but if you don't need windows, we would do this kind of dent. And this is how it looks. Once it was finished, you can see like plinth, architecture, roof, capital column, pretty simple. All the windows are like just one size, door is one size, they are made of oak. And this is what I was telling you about the blind windows. This is something that maybe it's a nugget for the students. You can really trace back and learn from, you don't have to learn from architects only from the 20th century. This is one of those trees pieces. But once you decide to do this kind of gesture that it may seem trivial, you have to pay the consequences. This is like the fenestration of that facade that has no windows, has all blind windows. And you have to face the consequences and draw every block one by one, because otherwise you cannot give the bricklayer the plans to do the even and odd rows to adjust for that small dent that it's 5 centimeters. So you have to do this kind of drawings, which is like pretty much drawing one by one, and then you have to adjust the even rows and the odd rows to make that small gesture. This is how the thing, another of the buildings. This is a classroom. This was already working. Another view. All the facilities, because it's cinder block in and out, they have to run through from the exterior. It was pretty carefully done with like inox tubing, and we decided where the perforation went. There are some of these buildings that get really like transparent. And this is by night again. This roof gets very light. During the day, very solid. This is the interiors. This is the installations I was talking about. And the interior, because it's classrooms, we went for the cinder block to mimic the farms of the local area, but we also wanted like we weren't spending that much in the cinder block, but we would spend quite a lot of the budget in this kind of acoustic oak panels to make the auditorium and the classroom perform properly. All the classroom has this like furniture that it's like sliding doors, and you can put all the chairs and all the furniture and everything and just get an empty class in 10 minutes. And this ceiling is adjusting for the HABC machines to host it there. And this is where the HABC impulse all the air, and it gets it back through this kind of fixed furniture. And the other side's like more naked, like you can see all the fixtures. And that's it. Thank you for listening.
Questions. I will move around and give the mic if there are questions.
Then dinner, drinks.
Thank you, Jose. Have all these trips changed your definition of what constitutes a territory?
That's a super difficult question, Adrian. And I come from a nationalist place. Yes, it has. I think they have less limits than we think they have. And I also think that they are less permanent than we think they are. They are extremely like fragile. They can die in a day because something happened in an island in the Pacific. So in that sense, like when I was drawing with my students all this kind of site analysis, I was telling them, don't frame it. It's just like there's limits are like very natural and they come and go and they are really blurry. So yeah, it has. Yeah. Did I answer your question?
Okay, one more and that's it.
Okay.
So out of the characteristics that you think define a territory, which are the ones that you think are the most important? You mentioned
Climate.
fertility, environment.
Yeah.
Is there any other one that you would?
Climate for sure, and water pretty much. I was really surprised because when there was water, people were kind of like doing okay. When there's no water, that's why I was surprised that in Paraná that it has like tons of water, like in San Pedro. They were really poor, and I was like, things grow here like without doing anything, so what's going on? I was asking the government. But pretty much if there's water, it can make a difference, like really like a true difference in a territory. I would say even more than climate. You could go really extreme on climate, but if you don't have water, that's a challenge.
So you started with a photo of yourself, right? And told us that you grew up on a farm.
Yeah.
Then you started to study architecture at some point,
Yes.
which seems like it could be seen as maybe getting away from a farm.
Yes.
When did you realize that there was a design opportunity coming from your background in agriculture?
To be honest, when I was commissioned the farm, I mean, I was like, okay, I didn't have anything to do. No, actually, I thought, I had a sense that it could be, because I had lived through it, and I was commissioned this when I was at the GSD. So I was telling all my GSD student peers, no, I'm going back and making a farm. And they were pretty much laughing. I mean, they were like, man, so how come you come here to study when you are going back and making a farm? But I somehow knew the clients, and I knew that there was a lot of opportunity because I have lived my family like since I was a kid. So I have heard my parents complain about this shouldn't be run this way. And that's why I thought, and then I got in and it was like much more opportunity than I previously imagined.
Thank you, Jose. I'm currently writing a paper for Professor Mumford's class on the relationship with typology and pure functionalism and just how to wrestle with that. Based on your travels and kind of the exposure you've had, how do you see the relationship of typology and functionalism, especially through the lens of, for example, this farm or other projects that you're working on?
I think they are pretty tied together, especially in environments like this that there's like very little resources. Maybe in other areas you can be more flamboyant, but in environments like this, especially in Mongolia, it's just like there's no screw that is not tied to in the typology that is not performing like really accurately. That's not to say that when I was going to explain these kind of things of blind windows, I also wanted to say to students that we have criminalized ornament, and don't be afraid of also using ornament because it has a cultural value and it can express many things inside the design. So it's not all about performative, but it's when you are in an area that everything is about performance, even you, then the typology is really close together. I guess in an urban environment, it's not. It has more to do with social and other kind of inputs.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask.
Okay.
So, what do you think that the School of Architecture did not prepare you before taking that trip? And which are the things that you wish you would know or learn different from the school?
Well, I don't know. I went to Barcelona to a really good school.
No.
No. Yeah, I know what you mean. I think like when I started the research, I didn't expect it to be that impacted from it. The proposal for the wheelwright was all about the environment and numbers and like super technical data. And then once you put boots on the ground, you realize that there's a lot of people behind these territories. So it really shifted the whole thing. And when I presented it at GSD, the jury was like, this is not what you told us you were going to do. But this is much more interesting because it's talking about people and design has to talk about people. So I guess I was not prepared to, like you kind of anticipate stuff, but not in a very real way. I think you have to really, like, if you want to design good things, you have to learn about people, like talk to people, yeah.
I was more thinking about which are the things that we are not teaching in the school.
Here?
In general, in the schools of architecture,
Okay.
that need to be taught in order to have this type of, not everyone will be able to travel, but that experience probably should have this aha moment for all our students. So thinking about which is the things that you are missing from your education that then allowed you to take the trip in a different way, or that would allow everyone to leave the school and become a different architect?
I think schools should make students more kind of self-reliant. When I started this, I haven't used a proper camera in my life. So you go online and you learn. When I did this, I haven't talked to a government or to United Nations in my life, and I didn't know how to address them. So you go online and you look for those emails, you find them, and you ask. I was very lucky, and I had a really good sponsor, and I have the money so that they responded. But if you ask properly, you get a response, and you get help. So that kind of self-reliance, which is not something very... it's not something that you can teach like really like in a NAB manner, but it's something that it has to be taught in an architecture school because you're going to talk to many different disciplines and agendas, and the guy who put these bricks, you have to know how to modulate your language to adjust to the receptor of your message. So you can talk to the guy who welds the steel and who puts the brickwork, and the guy who's paying for it, which is another totally different language.
Thank you for a really fantastic lecture. And
thank you, Robert.
It raises a lot of issues. I'm very intrigued also by what I think it was Hannah that asked about because typology is something I'm discussing in my alto class now, but I think the vernacular has always been closer.
Yeah.
I don't even know that we should use the word typology in the kind of formal sense of architectural education in a formalized manner, but this is a building that uses this double roof, which is a very ancient idea for being able to create an interior without so much insulation, without so much of many other things. And this is a particularly inspiring use of it. And I have to say, as a historian, I'm very happy to hear you talk about Brunelleschi. But this is very close in my mind to this kind of slightly crazy pavilion that Corbusier did, which was theoretically a house, but it could be a house. It has a kitchen, but in the end, it's a kind of a demonstration. This one is, to me, cleaner. It's because it actually is directly connected. But the pinwheel plan, I mean, it has a lot of architecture in it. But I think, for me, the overall feeling of the way that you lecture is that something, whether you had it naturally or whether you learned it, or it's probably both, you absorb, change, translate, represent. And that's actually what we do really well. We have to be sensitive to what's working. Yeah. And it's never really about form. Form might take many sort of iterations, but it's really about the sort of function in a very, very pure sense. am I going to be able to sleep tonight? Am I going to be warm enough?
Yep.
And how is this architecture? So, studying the huts, I think is fantastic. And, and the particular microclimate of the huts and the difference just even in Mongolia between the south and the north. So to me, this has been an incredibly educational lecture.
Thank you, Robert. It was my goal was not to showcase my work because I think it's irrelevant for the school. So I thought it was like if I make some of you to think about it, it would be more useful. So that's why I put it this way.
But I think it's quite beautiful, and it clearly is tied together.
Thank you.
There's a kind of a seamlessness to it that I appreciate.
I think Don has a question.
Should let Robert have the final word, but it's aside. I mean, it's a good separation in the sense of you bookended with architectural projects, and in the middle, the wheelwright research. If you didn't see the architectural projects, I would think you're an anthropologist. Yeah. And it's incredible seeing that process. I'm just curious. I mean, it's a very simple question, but you certainly touched the world in many ways, in different scales, and from large to small. And you also said that the project changed as the research was done. What was left out? What couldn't you get to? Was anything left out in your mind? Is there more research to be done? There's always more to do. But was there a place that you went that you didn't originally anticipate, or as you started the research, you said, no, I have to get to Mongolia or to New Zealand? I guess that's, is there anything that's left unvisited for you in your research?
Again, when I chose, you have to choose the places before you submit the proposal. So I knew something was going on, but I didn't know what was going on. But I have somehow I don't know if it's browsing the internet that gives you this kind of ability to find a little golden stone, and then you say here's gold, and then you go for it, and then sometimes you find it and sometimes you don't. And there were many things left behind, and also I was talking to some friends the other day, and I was so tired after this that I didn't do any of these rural, because you are sleeping in places that you don't want to sleep, and but it should have continued, which I might do now, talking again to those governments and proposing architecture once you have done the research. I was so exhausted that I just hated it. I put it in the drawer, and it was there for a couple of years. But now I have somehow the confidence to go to a Paraguayan government and offer a serious, specific, unique proposal for some site. So I think that was missing, and I think if that's missing, if there's no, I was very happy when I submitted this, and I was talking to Michael Pollan, you know Michael Pollan, so I was like, wow, I'm talking to the guy who knows more about food production in the world. And he told me, when I showed him the research, he told me, if there's no architecture, it has no value. So if there's no proposal, he told me, this is fine, but what are you going to do about it? So if there's no proposal, the research kind of misses a limb. And that's, I guess, next step, yeah.
Hi. So I really enjoyed listening to your lecture, and I was curious on what are the differences between designing for a cow versus designing for a human, and how did you go about discovering those differences?
Designing for a cow is everything is about function and performance, and designing for a human has other venues that are involved in. But also the people which I was working with here that are designing for cows, they are running those algorithms like math and code and hardcore code. They have a feeling that they also have to provide an extra quality to it. So they are not, it's not enough for them to go for performance, but they are like involved in animal comfort. And in my case, I was trying to adjust for some technical data that they were sending me to make the building. So I was also like providing feedback about how to do that kind of adjustment like in the proper way. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.